I will now introduce lesson 21, which begins with the verb disjunctive. The verb disjunctive introduces clauses that do not stand in sequential relationship with the preceding narrative. Clauses of this type break the narrative sequence and may be classified generally as disjunctive clauses. The disjunctive clause is signaled by a verb plus a word other than a finite verb at the beginning of the clause. Such a clause may be introduced by a verb plus a noun, or a verb plus a pronoun, or a verb plus a participle, or rarely a verbal form that breaks the consecutive narrative sequence. And the following examples illustrate common constructions and some of the major translation possibilities. Now, one example of this are circumstantial clauses. The disjunctive clause may provide some circumstantial information about the action of the main clause. The information may be temporal, in which case you could translate the verb as while or when, or concessive, although, or causal, because, or manner, in which case you translate it by, or general description of the main clause. And here's an example of of this. You have Vayira Elav Adonai Ba'elonei Mamre Vahu Yoshev Peta HaOhel Bakom Hayom. Now, here it starts off, and the Lord appeared to him in the terebinths, was the type of tree of Mamre. And then comes the circumstantial clause, while he was sitting at the opening or the entrance of the tent during the hot of the day. Now, here you have a verb, but it's not that the Lord appeared and he was sitting, but rather that the Lord appeared while he was sitting. Now notice you have a participle here. Circumstantial clauses are especially commonly formulated with a participle. And so the main verb is a finite verb, but then the circumstantial clause in this case happens to be participial. And this is one of the cases where it's a temporal clause that can be translated while giving simultaneous action. Another type of disjunctive clause is the parenthetic clause. The disjunctive clause may introduce information that is parenthetical to the main narrative, information that the reader needs to know but does not fit into the narrative sequence. And here you have an example of that. Vayahi riv bein roe miknei Abram u bein roe miknei Lot. And there was a strife between the shepherds of the property of Abraham and the shepherds, and between the shepherds of the property of Lot. But then it goes on to say, Veha ani Yoshev Ba'aretz. And the Canaanite was dwelling in the land. And so this clause, and the Canaanite was dwelling in the land, and again notice this a participial phrase with Yoshev, that is a Simply a parenthetical statement just to remind the reader that this was at the time when it wasn't that Lot and Abram were alone in the land, but that there were Canaanites there to deal with too. And the parasites were there too. Haparizi, parasites, were there as well. Well, anyway, that's a parenthetical clause. Another type of disjunctive clause is initial clauses. The disjunctive clause may mark the beginning of a new section in the narrative and not just a parenthetical break. In the following example, the normal order of verb plus subject is reversed. So here you have in Genesis chapter 4 and verse 1, Ve ha'adam yada ishto. And it's translated, and literally would be, and the man knew his wife, that is, had sexual relations with her. But since it is a disjunctive clause, you might want to translate it, now the man knew his wife. Or this could be understood as a pending case, which is a variation on this. And as for the man, he knew his wife. And as for the man, he knew his wife, and she begat Cain. So that's initial clauses that are disjunctive. Again, breaking, normally you would expect a verb consecutive. But when you don't get the verb consecutive, you change the word order and put the subject first. Well, that's disjunctive. And then you have contrastive clauses, in which a disjunctive clause simply expresses one idea in contrast to the main idea. And here you have an example, Ki Yodea Adonai Derek Sadikim, Yahweh, for Yahweh knows, imperfect, the way of righteous ones. But then the next clause begins with a vav, V'derek Rashaim Toved. But the way of the wicked will perish. And here, even though you use the word and, the contrast between righteous versus wicked, God knowing versus perishing, suggests a contrast, and therefore it should be translated not and, but in this kind of context. Now, section 21.2 goes on now to introduce the passive participle. Passive participle has the following pattern: a kamatz under the first consonant, a shurik, or a kibbutz sometimes, but usually a shurik between the second consonant and the third consonant. The kamatz will reduce to shavah when you add longer endings, but that's the base form. And so this would be appointed one, pakud. Pakuda would be she who is appointed. Pakudim would be they who are appointed, the kamatz here reducing to shavah, and then the pakudot would be those who are appointed. When you make them construct, in all those cases, the kamatz reduces to shavah all the way through, and then you get the construct ending. So instead of, for the feminines, difference between the absolute and the construct is simply the reduction of the vowel to shavah, because the accent shifts forward in construct. And then the paguda becomes pagudat, and pagudim becomes pakude, and pagudot Don't stays the same, as it turns out, absolute and construct. The passive participle has the same function as the active participle, except that the subject of the verb is being acted upon in a passive form. It is a verbal adjective that has to agree with the noun it modifies in gender and number and definiteness if it's attributive, and gender and number in any case. So here you have some examples. If you want to talk about the captured city, to capture is lakad. So you have ha'ir, and ir is feminine, so it's ha'ir ha'lekuda. The city, the captured one, the captured city. But if you want to make a sentence out of it, you could say the city was captured. So you take the participle captured, lekuda ha'ir. Here the article is with the word city. There is no article with the passive participle, and that would be an indication that this is a sentence, that the participle is a predicate adjective participle. And so the city is or was captured. And then it can also be used as a noun. And so you can speak al-pakude ha-chayel. You can speak with regard to or concerning the officers, the appointed ones, of the army, the chayel. And so it can be used either attributively, predicately, or again, like regular participles, substantively. And as the paradigm in the preceding example shows, passive participles can also stand in construct state. Frequently, the noun following indicates the agent or instrument of the participle. So here you have a passive participle bazu, which is from baza, to despise, and it says anoki bazu I am despised of people. But the meaning is I am despised by the people. They would be the agent of the despising in that kind of construct relationship. Well, the next section is going to be maybe a little long, so I think maybe we'll stop here and continue in the next video.